Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my definitive review of the new Viltrox Autofocus 50mm F1.8 STM. In this case, I'm reviewing it for Sony E-mount, and I suspect it will probably come in a few other mirrorless mounts as well. I've been excited for this lens to finally arrive. Viltrox did some announcement of some of its new products, which include the 24mm F1.8 for full frame that I reviewed about a year ago, a little less than that. And then they had on the roadmap coming what seemed to be very quickly a 35mm and 50mm F1.8. Obviously the 35mm and the 50mm lenses have gotten delayed a little bit, but now the 50mm is here, and I'm really glad to review this because there's been, although there's tons of lenses available and a lot of 50mm options available on Sony at this point, what we haven't seen a lot is in that kind of budget category, the f1.8 kind of type lens. Sony's 50mm f1.8 is, you know, it's kind of the nifty 50 for the platform. It's been out for a while. It is okay, but no better than okay. Its MTFs are only so good, and its autofocus doesn't reflect the latest of Sony's technologies. And so I certainly thought and continue to think that there is room for a lens in that category. To this point, when people have asked for a recommendation, I've often been actually recommending not a 50mm lens at all, but the Samyang 45mm f1.8, a lens that I like a lot, but certainly doesn't have the kind of build quality that this particular lens does. So today we're going to dive in and give you a closer look at the performance of this lens and whether or not you should consider purchasing one for yourself. First, however, a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Phantom Wallet, the minimalist, modern wallet that sets you free from a bulky traditional wallet while also making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. Visit phantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber. You can even customize your wallet with new accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even the Chipolo tracking integration if you're the kind of person who loses their wallet. Use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out. So we're going to start by taking a quick look at what's here in terms of the build, very similar to what we saw with the 24mm f1.8, which is to say a lot of good things. Let's take a look. So our overall build here is pretty much what I've come to expect from these Viltrox lenses, in that this is definitely a cut above what you're going to see in your typical budget lens. Now, it is a little bit more expensive relative to, say, the Sony 50mm f1.8, which retails for about $250, whereas this lens is about $380. But this is built more like a mid-range lens than a budget lens. So everything is metal here, including a really nice focus ring that has a nice damping to it. We do have an aperture ring that allows you to select in between going into automatic mode, or it's a declicked aperture with 1/3 stop markings all along the way if you want to select aperture that way. There is no AF/MF switch on the lens itself, and it does come with a lens hood along with a lens pouch. The lens hood, it is pedal shaped. It's made of nice thick plastics, though I will say, as is typical with these Viltrox lenses, because everything is so nice and metal on this, the plastic lens hood does feel a little bit cheap by comparison. But then again, this is an inexpensive lens at the end of the day. It has a 55mm front filter thread up front, and the lens diameter is 70mm, and the overall length of the lens is 88.2mm. And so it's a moderately sized lens, not particularly large, but it is a little bit bigger than what you're going to find from either the Sony or the Samyang AF 45mm f1.8, the two lenses that I would consider to be the most similar in terms of price and, you know, maximum aperture. Because this is a higher degree of build, all in metals, it is heavier than those lenses. It weighs in at 340 grams, so it's not a heavy lens, but certainly you're going to feel that additional heft. And in this case, it has a feel of quality. Metal lens mount, obviously, and of course there is a USB-C port back here that allows you to do firmware updates on the fly. The lens is internally focusing, nothing extends or protrudes during the focus action. Minimum focus distance here is a little bit lower than some of the competing lenses. You can only focus down as closely as 55 centimeters, and you have a fairly low 0.10 times magnification. More on that during our image quality section. In terms of the actual build, however, though, this is a nicely made lens. It probably stands out from its immediate competition as being the nicest in terms of its build quality. So really the main thing that we don't see as a part of the Viltrox formula at this point is there is no weather sealing, which is something that I would like to see them kind of employ as the next level. At the same time, however, I recognize that this is more of a budget end of the spectrum option, though when you're creeping up close to $400, as this lens does, you know, you're kind of straying out of that budget territory and into the low end of the moderately price range. So I think that there's room to adopt at least some degree of weather sealing there. Sigma certainly has it in their I series, for example, where at least there's a gasket at the lens mount, and this lens isn't priced all that far from those lenses. So a lot of good things in terms of build. I also noted a lot of good things when it comes to autofocus. Early on, of course, Viltrox as a new company, and a new company in terms of developing autofocus, which, by the way, they jumped to really quickly. I reviewed one, count them, one manual focus lens from them before everything after that was autofocus, which is pretty impressive to me. And I've seen a growing sophistication in terms of their just focus consistency. So in this case, I actually shot several. I think I've recorded at least 3 episodes using this lens. And frankly, I expected to see a little bit of pulsing or missing or some hesitancy. And I didn't see any of that. As I edited throughout all the videos, it was, you know, rock solid in terms of focusing on my eye and keeping a consistency of focus. So very good results there. And then I also found when I was out shooting in real world conditions, that I was able to get very good autofocus results from the STM in terms of accuracy. And as you can see from some of these shots, that even where the depth of field is very narrow, it still nailed focus. And that was my experience kind of across the board. When I did a portrait series, I got very good focus results, you know, in terms of, you know, detecting the eye and delivering consistently focused portrait results. And we'll dive into those a little bit more deeply during the image quality section. Likewise, I have a few pet shots where I got really good results. This shot of Ferrari, very good lighting because I was using the flash. However, in this, you know, very low light shot of Loki, I was able to get a good focus on the eye and a good result, even though I was shooting at, I believe, ISO 6400 and very dim conditions. So really not a lot to complain about. The focus speed is good, although if you have to do a full focus rack, you will see a little bit of a momentary pause. It's not like immediate like that, but you know, focus speed overall is good. And as I said, I really had no issues with autofocus. And so they're doing a good job with this. You know, I think it's a lead type STM. And so anyway, a good execution and a good end result. So that leads us to a discussion of the image quality. So, you know, with any lens like this, we do have to recognize where we are in terms of market position. And so sometimes you have to kind of moderate expectation. This is not a G Master lens, and it's not priced anything like that. However, relative to the performance, with a few weak areas, overall the optical performance was quite good. We're going to dive in and break that down together. So let's start by taking a look at vignette and distortion, where actually an odd thing happened that I didn't catch right until the very end of my review cycle. As you can see, looking at the raw image here, there's some visible pincushion distortion, though not too extreme, and then some very obvious vignette. Initially, I actually thought that the distortion and vignette were extremely low on the lens because, to my surprise, I discovered that there actually was a standard profile available for the lens that was automatically being applied. Here, I've actually had to manually deselect it because it was automatically applied, and that's just never been my experience with any Viltrox lens before. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that there was a profile that was already there that was automatically being corrected. It just shows the change status for Viltrox in terms of their lens development. Now, if we turn those corrections off, what you can see is it took a -3 to correct for the distortion, but a much more significant +86 to correct for the vignette, which is a good full 3 stops in the corner. That raises one final point. So here on the right side, we've got the raw image with that automatic correction profile being applied. So you can see it even at f1.8, a really great looking result. On the left side, however, I've got the exact same image out of camera that was my JPEG result. And so as you can see, the vignette is much more obvious in this particular image. And that's because the unfortunate thing here is that Viltrox is still not really enjoying correction within the Sony camera. And so if you shoot RAW, as I do, not really an issue. But if you shoot JPEG, it still doesn't receive that full first-party support. Now, I did see a pretty typical Viltrox shortcoming here, and that is that there is some longitudinal chromatic aberration, and so you'll mostly see it as green fringing beyond the plane of focus, as you can see here, in this very high contrast. And this is, frankly, this is a kind of worst case scenario, but you can definitely see that fringing that's there, some purple before the plane of focus, and it definitely will show up in some situations. So we're going to take a look at overall resolution here. This is on a 50 megapixel Sony Alpha 1 at 200% magnification. Now, 100% magnification, everything looks pretty amazing. 200% though, we can see that contrast is not off the charts in the center of the frame. There's a good amount of resolution here, a very strong, and if you compare the MTFs from this compared to, say, the Sony 50mm F1.8, this is definitely the stronger lens optically, but contrast is just a little bit reduced here. Mid-frame actually looks really good relative to the center of the frame. I feel like the mid-frame actually holds up a little bit better here in terms of the contrast look, and if we kind of work our way down, that looks really fantastic, just a little off-center, and even down into this zone looks really great. And if you look at the MTF from the lens, you'll see that there is a dip right if you get off-center, and then it picks back up at about this zone, and you can really tell it here. And then there's a little bit of a drop-off towards the edge, but we can see that it's actually really strong except for that last little degree there at the end. And so, overall, you're actually getting pretty good sharpness across the frame. So to give you some real-world perspective, this is ISO 3200, so obviously not optimal lighting, but you can see here that even in this kind of lighting condition, there's actually really good detail here in the center of the frame, and you can see that around our dog, there's a lot of rendering of some of the fine details there, the hairs there, and so it's not like Sony GM level, but it's actually quite good. Another case in point here, and again, this is another one of those situations where, it's very high contrast, and so actually I felt like the fringing wasn't obviously nearly as bad in this situation. But if we look at our subject, number one, focus is nailed here, so I did get actually really good focus results. But you can see that the detail here on the subject actually looks really quite great. A lot of fine detail that's rendered there, and no, contrast isn't off the charts good, but in this particular image, I think everything looks pretty good. One final real-world shot, and this is a little bit more optimal conditions. I was actually testing a new Godox flash at the same time, so that helps to deliver some fine detail there. But you can see that even at f1.8, there's plenty of detail in the fur there around Ferrari's eyes and down into his muzzle, and so a nice performance there. So if we compare f1.8 to f2, first of all, the thing that kind of stood out to me is that it metered the exact same way. Now, that it probably shouldn't have, because if you look at the histogram over here at f1.8, yes, it's here, but if you click on the f2 image, you can see that it definitely shifts about that third stop to the left, which means that it's brighter here on the left side at f1.8 relative to f2. So that's more of a metering quirk than anything, not a reflection of the fact that the aperture hasn't changed, because clearly it has. But if we dive on in at the 200% level, you can see that really there isn't much difference, no like major leap here. And so I would say that the f1.8 and the f2 result, they look pretty close to identical. Now going on to f2.8, you see that full stop. Now the metering is reflective of the fact that we've gone in that full stop. And in the center of the frame, contrast is a little bit better, but no major jump forward there. Again, the mid frame is still looking very good, though not radically different between f2 and f2.8. Seems like contrast is a little bit higher here. And if we look down here into the corner, you can see that it is starting to improve in the corner performance. We'll hop over to the other side, where you can see similarly here in Queen Elizabeth's hair, you can just see that there's better contrast and a better, detailing of those kind of the fine things, rendering of those fine details. Now, if we make the jump from f2.8 to f4, you can see that contrast has really boosted here. And so we're starting to get into the sweet spot. And now you can see that also in the center of the frame. f4 looks way better than f2.8 in the center of the frame. And if we look at the mid-frame is looking fantastic at f4. And we can see down into this corner that we also have a very strong performance down here at f4. And if we stop on down to f5.6, it is better still, with now fantastic results right into the corner of the frame. Now, typically, I find that diffraction makes f16 look worse than whatever the wide open result is, but that's not the case here. You can see that f16 actually still looks pretty good, and that's true here in the mid frame. And if we look down in the corner, f16 looks noticeably better than it did at f1.8. So this is a lens that I wouldn't hesitate to shoot at very small apertures. Now, one area where this lens suffers relative to the Sony lens is that the Sony can focus down to 45 centimeters, whereas this Viltrox can only focus down to 55 centimeters, which leaves you a very low, just 0.10 times magnification. That being said, it actually does really well up close. And you can see that at 100% magnification, the contrast in the detail and then also just kind of the flatness of the plane of focus is all quite good here. And so anyway, not impressive in terms of magnification. Fairly impressive, however, in terms of performance. Now, what I would consider to be the greatest weakness for the lens is found in this Christmas tree light image, where you can see that it has some fairly pronounced, I mean really pronounced, what you often call onion bokeh, or, you know, the concentric circles inside. Very busy, and so I don't love that. I suspect you won't either. You can see some of the geometric deformation here, cat eye towards the edge of the frame, stopping down to f2.8. Circular shapes are a little bit better, though you're starting to see the shape of the aperture blades, and stopping down to f4. And there's a little bit of motion blur here, shooting in obviously very dim conditions. But you can see that you can still see some of those, you know, the shape of the aperture blades. Not terrible, however, still reasonably round and even. Now, I found that at landscape apertures, I thought everything looked really quite good here. This is at f5.6, and so again, 50 megapixels all across the frame. You know, pretty much everywhere we look. I mean, depth of field is affecting here, but down on this side, up into the trees, there's just a lot of details that are rendered there, looking quite good. Here's another shot here, which, you know, has nice depth to it. And you can see that, you know, again, looking in at a pixel level, that everything looks nice and crisp. Lots of detail there. And so a useful lens in terms of its versatility, even though it has a, you know, a moderately low price. The bokeh quality, really, as we can see before, I mean, if you have those bright lights in there, that's obviously a bit of a distraction. This particular image I thought looked quite good. Bokeh looks fairly soft. Here's another shot where, again, it's, you know, not as creamy as the best lenses, but you can see, number one, we've got very good detail holding up here, and contrast on our subject, and a nice defocused background. So this all adds up to be a pretty good budget portrait lens if you're looking for a 50mm lens. And again, contrast isn't off the charts, but you can see that, you know, we've got a nice looking result here. Here's another shot here, and you can see that, you know, in this case, I've put just a preset from Lightroom on this to give it a bit of a look in terms of the toning, but you also see it's added some noise. But here I thought that the image looks really cool. And here you can see layering some foreground, that it's done a pretty good job here. And you can see subject looks good and crisp. You can also see a bit of that fringing in the background that I mentioned before. Another portrait shot here. And again, you know, consistently focused results. That's all good. And it was freezing out here. I will point out my daughter, we made this really brief because it was about kind of sub-zero conditions here. Final thing that I will draw your attention to is that the lens can produce a little bit of flare artifacts if the sun's right in the frame. So you can see here wide open, and even if we pan across, you can see, you know, at different points some, you know, flare results. And then if we stop down to f11, you know, you get this, you can see the blades a little more clearly defined, but you can also see that there continues to be some flare artifacts if we pan back and forth. And in most situations, real world situations like this image, you know, there's a little bit of ghosting here, nothing extreme, and I didn't find anything like terribly destructive, but neither is it a flawless performance either. So a little bit of a mixed bag, but overall I would say more good than bad. And so as you can see, weak areas tend to be the busy bokeh in terms of the kind of onion bokeh if you have bright lights there, and then also some fringing, though the fringing I don't think is going to be overly destructive in most situations. But what you do have is quite good sharpness overall, and I think that sharpness shows up even better in real-world results than what it did on the test, and also quite consistent results across the frame to where you actually have pretty decent corner performance wide open, and it all becomes excellent by landscape apertures. And so for the price point that we're talking about, this lens can achieve very, very nice results, even though the bokeh is not as creamy as, you know, the top-end lenses. This lens isn't priced like those lenses either. And so I would say relative to the Sony 50mm F1.8, this is actually giving us a better overall optical performance. I would still slightly favor the overall rendering from the Samyang AF 45mm F1.8. I just think it has a really kind of special quality to it that still appeals to me. That lens obviously does not have anywhere near the kind of build quality that this lens does. And, you know, it's kind of a wash between them when it comes to autofocus. Though, as I said, I do slightly favor its overall optical performance. At the end of the day, however, if you want a lens that has a lot going on for it in the build, you know, having an actual aperture where you could do aperture racking if you wanted, and of course, you know, really having a stellar optical and autofocus performance, you know, this is a lot of lens for a price point of $380. And so if you're looking at spending a little bit more than you would for the Sony Nifty 50 but getting a lot more lens, the Viltrox 50mm F1.8 STM is probably worthy of your consideration. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my full text review, also to an image gallery. Check out those photos there. There are buying links there as well, and by using those links, it costs you no extra, but it helps to support this channel. So thanks to those of you who make a point to use those links. I appreciate it. There's also linkage there to follow myself or Craig on social media, and Craig will be doing a video-centric review of this lens for Let the Light In TV, so check out our new collaborative channel there and check out his take on this lens that will be coming there shortly. There's also linkage to become a patron or to purchase merchandise, and of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Be sure to ring that bell so you get notification when new content drops. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.